Growing up in the Viking world was, of course, very different than it is for us today. But there were also many similarities and expectations, and your opportunities would often depend on your gender, social class, but also your personality, bravery, and skills. So, what was it like to grow up in the Viking world?
Þetta Vikingasagan með Magnúsi.
Let's start at the beginning of life. During childbirth in Viking society, women would assist and support the mother, while men were not allowed to be present. This responsibility solely fell on women. Due to the absence of modern medical assistance, giving birth was risky for both the mother and child. It is estimated that 50% of children died before the age of 12. To ease the labor pains and ensure a safe delivery, women chanted, used items believed to have magical powers, and sang songs. These practices were based on mythical traditions, which were thought to help gain favor from the gods. However, frequent pregnancies at a young age increased the risk of complications for the mother. After the child's birth, it was checked for any deformities. If healthy, the child would live, but if not, or the father didn't want or could afford another child, it would be left out in the woods to die.
Nafngift.
According to Viking tradition, it was customary to name children after a departed family member, especially a direct ancestor such as a grandparent or great-grandparent. Ancestors held a significant place in Viking culture, and by naming a child after them, the child would be associated with their ancestors' good fortune, and it was believed that some of that good luck would transfer to the child, bringing them success in life. This way, part of the deceased would live on in the child. If a relative died while a child was still in the womb, that child was always given the name of the deceased relative, and sometimes also the nickname or byname of that person. More on that later. Consequently, Viking names often remained in the same families for many generations. In addition, names of gods were also a common choice when naming a child. Thor, the thunder god, or some version of it, like Thorbjorn, Thor plus bear, was quite common for boys, while as meaning god was used often for girls, as in Ashild meaning god plus strife. The father's status would govern the child's status. If the man was a jarl or a noble man, so would the child, at least if you were true-born or a child of a frill. A frilly was a woman with the same status as the man, but not the legal wife, but would act as a co-wife with the man's legal wife. However, if the mother was a thrall, the child would most likely inherit the mother's status and have a life in servitude. Now, there are a few examples where the father acknowledged the child as his, and they would enter a life like the father's legal children. Viking girls had to help with cooking, spinning, weaving, making cheese, and sewing clothes. They were expected to keep their fingers busy all day long, sewing and weaving, but most of all spinning wool. In one story, we hear a girl not happy with her chores, behaving in a way I think many parents can recognize. Caitlin and Un's mothers were furious with them for constantly messing around, instead of getting on with their spinning.
I am not doing my spinning. You know I always get it tangled. I hate it.
She picked up her spindle from the shelf where it lay in a mess of grubby raw wool and tossed it into a corner. The boys would help on the farm, learn how to fish and hunt, or help to make goods in wood or metal. In one story, we hear a boy saying,
"I'm sorry, peddler. I can't travel around the islands with you. You see, my mom needs me. I have to do all the heavy work around our cottage, like digging peat and fetching water."
The only ways of travel at that time were walking, riding, or sailing, so they had to learn how to ride a horse and how to fare on the water. In the winter, people also skied and used horse-drawn sledges to get around. Viking children didn't have books, but even so, there were plenty of stories to remember and facts to learn by heart. Traveling poets and storytellers told tales of heroes, historical events, family feuds, and the Norse gods and goddesses. Check out my video Viking Skulls for more on that. Most children were educated within and around the home by helping out with chores around the house. Particularly talented children might have been sent off to another house to better learn a specific skill, such as metallurgy, which might not have been done at their home. We have some examples of people taking in other children along with their own as foster children. This was done if the boy had a special interest, like wanting to become a blacksmith, or simply if the family needed this skill on the farm. The boy would then live with his foster father and learn the trade. However, it could also be a way to tie alliances and form strong family bonds. And some children even learn to read and how to carve messages in runes. Snorri Sturluson was brought up in a foster family and benefited greatly from this, and is one of the reasons we know so much about the Vikings, because he learned the stories and skills at his foster home. Skills such as fighting were taught in an informal setting, with most children honing their skills by practicing fighting with other children and perhaps a nearby adult. And the boys didn't get reprimanded for fighting with each other. In fact, they were actually encouraged to fight, not just with their fists or by wrestling, but with proper weapons, spears, axes, and swords. Those who were deemed as lazy were mockingly called charcoal chewers, a term which referred to their staying at home by the fire, while everyone else was hard at work. But there was also time for play. The word play, as we know it today, was not just reserved for children in the Viking period. Play was also used in relation to sports and exercise, musical instruments and weapons. Children in the Viking Age likely took part in a variety of leisure activities, including boating, swimming, racing, wrestling, and board games such as chess and hanafatafli. They could also watch adult activities like horse fighting or listen to stories and poems, such as the epic poems characteristic of Viking literature. Adults also played together. In the Icelandic sagas, for example, men are praised for proficiency in jumping, throwing, and running, obviously because the possession of such abilities could mean the difference between life and death in a battle situation.
Vikingaheimilið.
In Viking society, a child would not have been raised in a conventional nuclear family, comprised of parents and their offspring. Research suggests that households were typically more intricate, with an average of 7 to 8 individuals and the largest households accommodating up to 30 or 40 people. The complexity of these households can be deduced from various factors, including the size and layout of the houses, descriptions in written material, and rune inscriptions. The inhabitants of these households likely included not only family members, but also slaves, concubines, travelers, guests, workers, and specialists who would travel from farm to farm to perform specific tasks. According to the laws of the time, guests were required to be taken in and provided for, and to be a good host was something that was taken very seriously in Viking honor culture.
Fullorðin.
At the age of 12, there was a big celebration, not only because you had survived childhood, but because now you were considered an adult and started doing the things the grown-ups did. This would mean that you would learn how to handle real weapons, something that the girls also were taught on how to use. Due to the fact that the men often were away from the farm as fishermen, traders, or raiders, the women had to handle the farm, the slaves, and protect it from thieves that came to steal the animals. The boys had a much wider range of choosing what they wanted to become compared to girls, because Viking Age boys were often granted freedom and agency to do as they wished, so long as it did not harm the honor of the family. Sons were allowed to choose their own life path, whether they wanted to be a farmer, a warrior, a trader, etc. The girls' realm of choice was rather limited, though. We do know that some women participated on travels, raids, sometimes battles, and could also become a skald. Nevertheless, this was mainly a masculine domain, and those women are rather the exception than the rule. Most women in Viking society were usually stuck on the farm, taking care of the family and daily business there. However, daughters usually had a say in which they were to marry. More on that later. At around 15, the boys were brought along on trips, but also had to participate in battle if need be. In Viking society, women were usually married between ages 14 and 18, usually to a man who was 2 to 5 years older. While some marriages were for love, it was common for children of kings or nobles to have prearranged marriages to forge family alliances. Low-born individuals had a better chance of marrying for love. Marriage involved betrothal and wedding stages. The man or his father would propose to the woman's father or guardian, agreeing on a bride price, which in Iceland was 8 ounces of silver. The bride's father promised her dowry at the wedding, both the bride price and dowry remaining her property after the wedding. Witnessed by others, the 2 men would shake hands and set a date for the wedding within a year. Though the woman's consent could be sought, it wasn't required. Marriage, particularly among the wealthy, aimed to form practical economic or political alliances with little or no love involved. The wedding was a multi-day celebration, with plenty of food, drink, music, dance, games, and storytelling. However, these could end in a holmgang, a duel between drunken relatives or guests who had too much to drink.
Gælunöfn.
Vikings often received nicknames from people who knew them well and were usually derogatory. People themselves didn't use their nicknames, but others referred to them by it. People could get stuck with a nickname because of a physical or character trait, their occupation, place of origin, or habits. However, Viking nicknames could also be a mark of honor and reputation, and could be earned through feats of bravery, skill, or even mischief. Harald Fairhair is a good example. He let his hair and beard grow until he had united Norway into one kingdom. But let's face it, folks, what wouldn't one do for a fair maiden like Gyda? Someone who was probably not as fair-haired as Harald was Egil Skallagrimsson. Skalla meaning bald and grim meaning cruel or atrocious. He was not particularly attractive, in other words. It was not only physical characteristics that could give rise to nicknames. Sven, single-minded, may have been the type who held grudges and was slow to forget, and Einar Crookedmouth was probably a real troublemaker. They often got their nicknames based on who they were, but it's not certain they received them while they were alive. For example, Saint Olav was not considered holy until after his death. I'm planning on making a video about Viking names and nicknames, so I won't go into more detail than that in this presentation.
Arfleifð.
Inheritance in Viking societies allowed for both sons and daughters to inherit from their parents, although preference was often given to sons. However, if no sons were born, daughters could claim inheritance and had rights over their uncles and grandparents. Even the children of slave women and concubines could receive inheritance, although it was usually very little unless they were legally adopted by their father. In practice, they often received more than the legal amount, which was typically just a few small items, but they fared better if they were legally adopted. Illegitimate sons frequently inherited their father's land and wealth, even in the royal family where multiple illegitimate sons have inherited the throne. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed exploring what it was like for Viking children to grow up in the Viking Age. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. And I hope to see you in the next one.